What up, everybody? Sven Diesel here. Going to be tying the true Flyzilla. I've got, this is a fun new pattern. You got to get one of the hairline dubbins dragon tails. But let's go ahead and start our thread. This is a red tailor hook. I'm using GSP, and I'm just going to cover the shank of the hook because I don't really have a lot attaching this tailor hook to the dragon tail. But we'll use one of these purple for this one. Now I want to measure it, so you don't want to have too much of a gap, maybe 1.5 inches down, and I'm going to kind of pinch it, put it in place, and then that way I can kind of pull the fibers apart the best I can. It's not going to be perfect, but I'm going to take placement and pinch it, and we're going to be putting a little bit of super glue down. That's why I put the thread all the way down the shank of the hook, just to help bond it a little bit. So we'll put a little bead on the top, and be careful as you go to put this on that you don't super glue your fingers to the dragon tail or shift it around. Like once you put it down, leave it down and push some fibers down along the bottom side. And then I'm going to make a couple wraps so where I've separated it the best I can. And then I'm going to, secure the thread by tying in front of it and just pulling back any fibers I can. And this is pretty much the start of it. You can see it didn't really get too many fibers cranked in, but let it sit for a minute before you do this next step so it dries. We're going to be putting some whiting hackle in. Go ahead and grab from the middle section the longest one you can get, and take the fluff off. And we're going to be tying that in on that little bit of a 1/16 of an inch on the front of the hook that we left, a little bit of a spacing. And so I just prepared to tie it in, lift it up, and go ahead and secure it with a couple wraps. And we're going to be putting a little bit of a loon on this in a minute, and snip out our tip. Of course, it doesn't really matter because it's going to be pretty buggy with the fibers coming out, but we've now got our feather tied in, and the next step we're going to be doing is attaching this tailor hook to the front. We're using some of this just wire, and I'm going to go up through the eye of the hook, and normally I could go underneath and then back down, but I'm going to show you the more difficult way because that's how cool I am. And so I'm going to create a loop. It's easier for you to visualize how this is going to happen this way, but it also creates a more difficult matter because I got to shove the dragon tail through it and take my hook out of the vise. And so I'm just going to fish the dragon tail through it, take my hook out so that it's on the underneath side, and then you just got to be careful not to trap any of the dragon tail or hackle feathers when you pull this wire through. As you do one side at a time. The quicker way is just to wrap it underneath and pull it through the other way, but you want those wires coming out the hook so they're straight, and that's why the hook eye is bent up so they can come straight out. And that's secure now, and I'm going to do some wraps over the top of this now, and we'll be whip finishing in a second, but I want to build up a good little thread base over there so when I put the loon on, it's going to absorb into all this and really hold it in place. So we got the couple wraps there, and whip finishing with these wires really sucks. I'm not good at doing it with just my hand, so I use the tool, create a hole, shove both wires through my hole, bring it up and over. And the reason why this really sucks is because I got to do 2 or 3 of these, and instead of just a normal way of just wrapping it over. And if anyone has a trick to this, doing it any differently, I'm always open for comments because I hate doing this and I hate using my hand. But let's cut our thread out, and now we're going to put some loon on there and cure the loon for about 10 to 15 seconds. I've got the rechargeable light that shoves out 10 watts, so I'm pretty sure it's cured, but make sure you give it enough time. And we are now finished with the rear, I guess the rear section if we call it that. And this is where you're going to need 2 vices. So I'm going to bring my Regal Traveler up. I like it because it can adjust up to any angle I want, and I'm going to set this aside and start on the front hook The front hook is a B10S. This is a number 2, I believe. And I'm just going to start my thread, work my way down the shank, give it a nice even thread coating across it. Touching wraps doesn't matter. We're going to be putting a little bit of Z-cement on later to hold in everything we're putting on. And this is where the second vise comes in handy, because I'm going to put my tailor hook or stinger hook in that vise and kind of move the vise so that this dragon tail ends up, on the back third of the shank. And when I measure that, then I know exactly how long my wires are. And so that I tie my wires in first, making sure there's not a inconsistency in length of the wires. And so they're pretty much touching at this point, and I'm going to tie it in on the top of the shank of the hook with some loose wraps, working my way towards the front. And then I'm going to back over them, and we're going to be leaving those tag ends off the front because we're going to double them back now. And I make those loops and secure it loosely, working my way forward, and the wraps are kind of pinching those loops down so that there's not a big bulge. And I'm going to work my way back, cut those out with a little bit of room left, and then really kind of crank down on this now and going past those tag ends somewhat onto the back of the bend. And we now have our dragon tail secured by the wire. And this is where I just pull the second vise tight so those wires are tight. I measure the dragon tail, making sure the wire's not loose, and I'll tie that in. And I'm not going to work my way forward at this point. I'm going to work my way kind of back because I've got plenty of tail on there. Going to snip it out and get it as close as I can, and then kind of clean that up with some wraps, which will cause a natural taper down. And by doing so, this is now the dragon tail is secured hook to hook with the dragon tail itself and with the wire. And the wire, since I pulled it tight, kind of sits up in that dragon tail material. And then, of course, we're putting on some cement and letting it dry, some super glue, Z-cement, and that's going to bond the thread, the dragon tail, the wire, all to the shank of that front hook, and let it dry. Now comes the tricky part. I'm going to palmer this hackle I tied in earlier through this midsection. So I'm going to pull it towards you. It might go out of focus, but it's the only way I can get my hands in there. I'm going to twist my other vise, and I'm going to palmer this through this tail, and I want about 1/4 inch or even, I guess, consistently even wraps as I work my way up, being careful not to have the dragon tail twist on me. And this is kind of shoving that wire up and into the center of the tail, which shouldn't cause any issue, and maybe strengthening it a little bit. A concern I have is that if a fish chomps on this here in the middle somehow, it might break this hackle. But that requires me to land into a fish with this first, right? But I'm going to tie that off now, so it kind of creates a fun little midsection there with the long fibers protruding out of the dragon tail. And I'm going to add another black American Hackle rooster feather to this to kind of build up a little bit of the front body. And I'm doing this one also in black. You can play around with colors. These dragon tails are available in tons of different colors. These are just some that I have, and I'm not too concerned about the small fibers, so I cut out the tip, and I'm going to wrap this, not being too concerned about stray fibers shooting out, or I'm not too concerned also about touching wraps. And you can see I'm preening it back as I do a few wraps, and eventually as you get down towards the bottom of the feather, they naturally kind of stick straight up. And then I'll tie off this feather and preen those fibers back so they're kind of coned backwards, and that will be really nice for when I shove a head on this. And Since the head I'm going to be using is black, I'm going to tie in a purple feather to kind of match the tail, color coordinating it thus, because a fish always cares about color coordinating flies and streamers. If it's not, they won't go after it, is what's in my experience. Totally joking. But I'm going to speed this up. Same process, just wrap this around, touching wraps the best you can, kind of making sure majority of those fibers are going back. And as you make your way towards the front, you got to make sure you're leaving enough room for the head. It depends on which head size you're using. I've also done it with gluing on, some eyes, but the heads just make it super easy and quick because they just slide on with some glue. And so we'll cut out our stem there, preen those back, make a nice cone or taper backwards. And now I want to make sure that my head fits. And yep, that is perfect. Sweet. This is the Eclipse by Spawn fly fish. I ordered a bunch of them because I love the size. They work really good on miniature ones. But now we got to add the flash, the sparkly dazzle. And this is just some crystal flash that's, color coordinating once again. I'm going to tie it in on the lateral side and wrap it over the top, tie it in again. You want these to be about the same length as your Hackle. You can go longer, you can go shorter. I probably should have tied some in between the black and the purple just to add more, but let's go ahead and whip finish. That head is pretty much nice and clean at this point. It's ready for the head to go on, but let's just double check it one last time, because once I put the glue on, you're going to be in trouble. Look at that. That's a cool head. And I'm using the E6000. I'm just going to put a glob on the top and a glob on the bottom. And as I put that glob, I squeeze a little bit out and kind of scrape it off on the shank hook. And I'll do it on the bottom too. And this stuff you get a little bit of time to work with. And I'm going to kind of wiggle it on so that the glue is kind of filling that any void that I might have with that head. A little bit might ooze out. I just wipe it on the head, or you can wipe it off. And there you go. That last step, let's burn out the end, which is recommended on the package. I just wiggle it around and then push it, so it's got a nice little point. And that's all there is to it. So it's a lot stiff for the first 4 or 5 inches of this tail because of that wire in there. But we've got the tailor hook, we got a main body hook, and you can see it's still flexible, but tail has got tons of movement. So hopefully this helps somebody out there to go land some fish.